Okay, we have everybody. Everybody's here?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa Brown and Roxy Christensen, who have stepped up to support me in this this journey that we're about to take. And I'm Kirk Schneider. It's wonderful to meet you, even though I'm looking at a screen, but I get the vibes. So, welcome to this journey into experiential democracy, or what I'm more and more fond of calling I-thou democracy, that is just beginning to forge a path through our, sad to say, broken world. So let me get right to it. The first thing that strikes me about difficult conversations, whether of race, politics, religion, is how quickly they devolve into either verbal flamethrowing, violence, or just complete avoidance. Now, obviously, recent events at the Capitol and in our streets magnify these points. But what is it, I ask myself, that causes such inflamed reactions? And I think this is something that I hope you're asking yourself throughout this entire webinar. How is it that we get so stung by conversations so quickly? What gets triggered? And how can we take steps to address this reactionary position that we get into, to break the vicious cycle? Now, this is what I set out to investigate with my recent books, The Polarized Mind and The Depolarizing of America, a guidebook for social healing, which I'll be drawing from mainly in this webinar. So through this research, what I have arrived at is that the basis for this vicious cycle we get into is what I call the polarized mind. The polarized mind I define as the fixation on a single point of view to the utter exclusion of competing points of view. And this operates very much at the nonverbal or pre-verbal level, as well as the verbal. I think that's a very important point, that it's operating at an energetic level, very powerfully often, as well as the level of content of words. And this is something that we don't, I think, home in on enough with more conventional conflict mediation approaches. It's an experiential situation that goes below just content. So let's consider a couple of examples of the polarized mind. Now, I think that you'll feel some familiarity with these examples, even though they are dramatized. It's sort of like extreme polarization rolled up into one long sentence. But I think all of us have probably felt these polarized perspectives at one time or another, if we haven't actually expressed them. So here's person A. Oh, you're one of those fruit and nut jobs from the coast who hasn't got a clue. With your cushy life, you have no idea what it's like to have a real job, to live paycheck to paycheck with people you've known all your life, and to be dedicated to a way of life that defends moral Christian values against those shoddy values of immigrants and terrorists. Just take a moment to let that sort of reverberate with you. Can't even say the word because it's stirred me. All right, let's take person B from the other side. You're just an ignorant slob who has nothing going on in his life except a big truck, TV sports channels, and a cult 45. You're a loser who hates anything or anyone who threatens to expose your hollow life. You profess Christian morality, but you could care less about true Christian morality or true morality in general. Okay, take a moment to just be with those words. How does that feel for you? Does it have a familiar ring? My guess is that it's actually operating in the background for many of the conversations that people have in our country. So I also would like you to home in on all the stereotypes and belittlements in these two statements about flesh and blood human beings. Think of how much people's lives are distorted and reduced by such inflammatory phrases. How much do they really capture the fuller nuances and facets, the personal stories of the people that they're thrown at? Phrases such as fruit and nut jobs, being from the coast, not having a real job like a real man or real woman, or toward the other party, being called an ignorant slob who buys big trucks and guns for a hollow life. Think of how much any or most of us would feel with these phrases thrown at us, and how resentful we would be instantly by just these two simple descriptions, maybe even just a couple of the phrases. And think and feel, where would we go? How quickly we would go to a certain place of rawness and wounding. And yet, these are the kind of exchanges, again, that are happening every day in America, too often. In my experience and research, the chief basis for these vicious cycles, the vicious cycle of polarization, is fear. And essentially, fear of insignificance, the fear of not mattering before culture, before that other person. And once that trigger point is established, it generally gets amplified, with both parties going back and forth endlessly in a spiraling trap of what the Greeks called hubris and nemesis, lashing out and lashing back, lashing out, lashing back. And as we know, this is the fount of so much destructiveness from time immemorial, not just through wars, but through the kinds of devaluations and us-them mentalities that we've observed throughout history and in current times, unfortunately. We don't seem to learn how to break these cycles very well. So this webinar provides one time-tested way to help people address these fears that fuel the polarized mind and that lead to the vicious cycle. I call it the experiential democracy dialogue, and it derives from my own experience in developing this model over the past 15 years or so, as well as my more recent experience over the last 4 or 5 years as a trained moderator for Braver Angels, which is a grassroots citizens organization, now has some 10,000 members throughout the country, that brings self-identified liberals and conservatives together for living room style, highly structured dialogues. So I've drawn from both and synthesized it in this new version of the experiential democracy dialogue. Now, I feel like the experiential democracy dialogue brings a more intimate complement to the Braver Angels dialogues, which also have a great deal of intimacy, but I think they tend to be a little more group oriented, and this format that we're going to engage, the experiential democracy dialogue, it draws more directly from my background in existential humanistic therapy and applying those principles more directly to conflict mediation. And I feel like this moves us more toward a kind of deeper democracy, as Arnie Mindell has put it before. And I feel so strongly about the need to move toward a deeper democracy in our exchanges, because the overt, just the behavioral changes are not cutting it. People pick up on energies of each other. So let's look now at the experiential democracy dialogue format and review the phases before you go into dyads. I'll be inviting you to go into dyads to try out the format. So let's go to the first and most foundational aspect of this approach, as with Braver Angels, and that is the ground rules. We've learned over some very hard history in conflict mediation that just jumping into groups or jumping into these hard conversations can often get derailed very quickly, as I was mentioning before, and that a certain attitude, a certain sensibility really needs to be cultivated before even making actual contact with that other person. So that's why we really emphasize adherence to the ground rules. They set the tone for civility here, for humanity. So the first, I think, and most important point to remember as far as the ground rules is to do your best to come from a place of curiosity. Curiosity as distinct from presumption or dictating. We find that these dialogues work much better, and the likelihood of achieving common ground is much greater if one is not pushing the other according to one's own agenda toward a particular perspective. It's very phenomenological in that sense. We're really trying to learn about and understand the other as distinct from pushing them or getting into some kind of power struggle with them. Again, the nonverbal elements of this being very important. Try as best you can not to roll your eyes when you're engaged in dialogue with the other, or to take big sighs when you hear something that you don't like, or to arch your eyebrows. There's so many ways that we can derail, even energetically, these interactions. Again, really being respectful of the other person, not interrupting, taking turns as prompted, giving people space. I mean, that's what we learn in psychotherapy, the significance of the sacred space. And that's a lot of what we're trying to co-create here with these dialogues. So in summary, bring your best selves to the dialogue. And many of you have a lot of training in bringing your best selves. I say draw from it. Attempt to take, that larger perspective, and trying not to get caught up in particular narrow points. A kind of mindful approach, very, very helpful for this. So this portion is the setup, and this is where you decide on a topic. I have some sample topics here. You don't by any means need to stick with those, but it is helpful if you take a liberal or conservative position. So not only choose a topic within a couple of minutes that we're going to give you for the setup, but also decide on who's going to take the liberal and who's going to take the conservative stance. Now, I realize that may be very skewed. Maybe many of you are liberal and you're kind of in accord on a number of these topics. However, in that case, I think it's extremely valuable, especially for people involved in mental health delivery services, to attempt to embody the other. So I highly recommend that one partner attempt to get into, let's say, a conservative position as best they can, drawing from the conservative folks that they've known in their lives, maybe in their own family or friends that they have, and really trying to embody that other space, that other personality, which can obviously cultivate more empathy and can bring surprises that you might not have ever even thought of before, more facets. So I'm going to give you a few other themes that you might home in on that are more concrete, like you could take the theme of wearing masks and social distancing, election fraud, renaming schools and monuments, cancel culture, so-called, conspiracy theories, climate change, defunding the police, reparations for people of color, BLM, Black Lives Matter, First Amendment rights, the right to free speech, gun rights, Second Amendment, abortion. So these are all obviously very hot issues at this time, and they may be very timely for a number of you who are willing to work with these within a dialogue format. Visualizing the dialogue. Visualize before you even engage with that partner. Take a few minutes, about 4 minutes, to observe, to envision what it might be like to just sit with that person and to engage in the dialogue regarding the particular topic that you've chosen. What kind of thoughts, feelings, body sensations go through you as you just visualize encountering that other over that dialogue? Now, here's a place where mindfulness or presence is so important. Do the best you can to observe the thoughts and feelings as if you might observe a flowing river and the contents of that river. Just noting them, floating by, but doing your best not to attach to them or not to attach to the outcome of the dialogue as well. And then take a couple of minutes to try to envision the humanity of the other. Try to see that this is a flesh and blood human being who's got their own story, who has their own wounds and their own struggle, and their own honest unsettlements, anxieties, strivings. The second phase is what we call the background phase. And this is another way to more fully fill out the human being who is sitting before you even engage in the actual discussion. So this is really giving each partner, without interruption, a chance to talk about what it was like for them to grow up. Take a few moments to hit the highlights or lowlights of what it was like for you to grow up, to give your partner an essential taste of who you are as a person. And take a couple of minutes to talk about how your family system treated the other in your background, the other having to do with the topic that you've chosen, whoever the other is in terms of that topic, the conservative or liberal other, let's say, regarding the pandemic or classism, racism, what have you. In phase 3, this is where you get a chance to describe as mindfully and heartfully as possible what your stance is in regard to the issue you've chosen. Each partner gets complete chance without interruption to talk for approximately 5 minutes about their perspective, their position toward this topic, what a given topic. And then the listening partner takes a couple of minutes to reflect back what they heard as mindfully and heartfully as possible. And the original speaking partner gets to correct anything that feels distorted or off base, so that a full picture, or as full a picture as possible, is portrayed on the part of both partners in terms of their stances. The fourth phase is what we call the stereotypes exercise. This can be rather challenging, but we find quite fruitful, again, in giving a sense of the fuller picture of what each partner is dealing with in regard to their stance. So one partner begins, again, uninterrupted, by identifying the ways they felt stereotyped, given their stance, in regard to their stance, how people critical of them, just throw labels at them and reduce them in their minds. Then that same partner takes a couple of minutes to correct the false and misleading aspects of those stereotypes, to fill out the picture of who they feel they really are as a human being, rather than just a label. And then the final 2-minute segment is doing your best to acknowledge kernels of truth to the stereotype. And this may be one of the most difficult for people, but it is very, very true that there are usually some aspects of stereotypes that have a reality or have some validity. And it can really help open up and disarm the interaction when people can acknowledge vulnerabilities in themselves and in their stances. Phase 5, this is your chance to ask a policy question, or to ask a question of your partner in regard to their stance on the issue you've chosen. Again, try as best you can to come from a place of curiosity as opposed to presumption. Try to avoid having answers in your questions. Keep them as open as possible. You say you love guns. I'm very curious what it is you love about guns. Or you hate the NRA. I'm honestly curious. What is it that you hate about the NRA or a particular leader? Curiosity can change the whole tenor of the interaction. I'm sure you've seen this when you go into a situation where you're more oriented to discovery and open to surprise, to possibilities, as opposed to assuming, oh, it's going to be the same old answer, the same old conversation. No, that's going to deaden the interaction. Deaden it, or just spiral it out of control. So then the other partner gets some time within those 5 minutes to respond to that stance. So you maybe take 3-4 minutes to ask the other partner about their position, and then the listening partner has a chance. Oh, no, then the other, I'm sorry. The listening partner asks the speaking partner what their stance is, and the speaking partner has 3 or 4 minutes to reply. And if there is time, maybe a minute or so, the listening partner add something to it if they have a response to it. But again, keep it within the curiosity rather than finally, phase 6. Well, this is the culmination. What did you learn from the various phases? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about your partner? What did you learn about the other position? Did you feel heard? Did you feel related to? But I think most importantly, what did you discover from these exercises? And what does that imply going forward in your life? Did you discover any potential for common ground? Did you find any commonalities through all those discussions of the facets of who you are as people? Did it bring up any actionable steps that you're willing to take? So not just attitudinal shifts, but maybe a willingness to try something different in your life based on what you learned from the other person. In Braver Angels, we've seen people subsequently who are on very different sides of the ideological divide become friends. Or in our monthly groups, we call them alliance groups, we have developed friendships with one another, usually within those settings. There tends to be a breaking down of walls. And we have some pretty good research about this, which I may go into later, time permitting, as to what these dialogues promote as far as common ground or shifts in attitude toward the other. I'd like to mention also that there is strong research that people in the country in general have much more common ground than they generally perceive in our echo chambers, you know. And that is, it seems to have a great deal to do with the fact that we are in echo chambers and we're not crossing those divides and meeting person to person, and that we're getting, you know, very sectarian viewpoints from the news or from politicians that we identify with or are immersed with. So a lot of the impetus for this is for people to speak from their own cores, rather than, you know, representing some group or some party, et cetera, and attempting to break away, frankly, from the propaganda that we're just bathed in day to day, and to rediscover ourselves as human beings. So, as just a follow-up to all of this, I'd like to convey, to underscore that we all are really in the vanguard of a new historical movement in many ways. Experiential democracy, I-thou democracy, interpersonal democracy. You know, these dimensions have really not been tried very much throughout history, according to my own investigations. and also I think what you can plainly see when you look at our culture and you look at other cultures, particularly on a mass scale. When have cultures really mobilized around bringing groups of people together who are ostensibly strangers and who come from very different cultural, ethnic backgrounds for the express purpose of getting to know each other more as human beings? I think this is a really new edge to the democratic process, and hopefully will be an aid to avoiding catastrophe in our society and in our world. I certainly think that this is an approach that is more geared to the long run sustainability of humankind, but can be very powerful even in the short run. Certainly not the only solution in the short run. I mean, I am a believer in other means of attempting to bring about greater humanity, civility within our world. But for the long run, if we don't really get to know each other, we're going to be hung up on reactions and on labels, and that's a road to hell, as far as everything I can see. Okay. So with that, I would like to begin with reminding you of the ground rules again. And just take a few moments, collect your breath, try to get centered for participation in the dialogue. And just in a few seconds here, I'm going to ask Vanessa to drop you into dyads. I imagine that this will be randomly assigned. Okay. And the first item of business, so to speak, is to decide on the topic you're going to take and the role you're going to play. Again, I think it's most often helpful to take on a role of conservative, as you understand that, or liberal. And even if you're not, naturally one or the other, to do your best to embody that side. But you do need contrasting sides for this to work. Okay, so why don't we drop the folks into pairs at this point, and you'll have 2 minutes roughly. Vanessa will give you a 30-second little bubble indicating that we're going to be coming back to the large group to get ready for the next portion.
And for this 2 minutes, Kirk, just to clarify, you want us to choose which role we're taking and what topic, right?
That's right.